Radha Madhava Kunjabi Adi Pijana Bhadabha Girivara Adi Girivara Gopijana Balabha Girivardhani Lahaba Jasodhanandana Brajajanaranjana Jasodhanandana Brajajanaranjana Brajajan Jamunatira Vanapjadi Jamunatira Vanapjadi Jaya Radha Madhava Punjabi Adi Jaya Radha Madhava Punjabi Jaya Radha Madhava Punjabi Adi Jaya Radha Madhava Punjabi Gopijana Bhalabha Girivardhani Gopijana Bhalabha Gopijana Bhalabha Girivardhani Girivardhani Jasodhanandana Brajajanaranjana Jasodhanandana Brajajanaranjana Jamunatira Vanapjadi Jamunatira Vanapjadi Jaya Radha Madhava Punjabi Adi Jaya Radha Madhava Punjabi Jaya Radha Madhava Punjabi Adi Madhava Punjabi Jaya Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivajagacharya Ashtatarasatasi Srimad His Divine Grace Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya I don't know about all of you, but I really look forward to spending an hour with Krishna every morning with Srimad Bhagavatam. This Uddhava Gita section is really a blessing. Long ago somebody asked, can you? And sure, I'm glad they asked. I'm glad Prabhupada provided us with Srimad Bhagavatam. Of course, he didn't complete everything, but on his inspiration, here we are. Canto 11, Chapter 10. This morning is text 18. 19 and 20. Translation for 18. It is observed within the material world, that sometimes even an intelligent person is not happy. Similarly, sometimes even a great fool is happy. The concept of becoming happy through expertly performing material activities is simply a useless exhibition of false egotism. So there, Jaimini and those that view like him. Bhaktisiddhanta's purport, verse, translation. It is observed within this world that sometimes even a learned person feels distressed, whereas a great fool may feel happy. Therefore, it is simply a manifestation of false ego to think that by the expert performance of karma, one can achieve happiness. I like Bhaktisiddhanta's translation. The other one it's a little sarcastic. And Bhaktisiddhanta's, just a little more level. And I can make a comment like that because this language and the BBT is not Prabhupada. It's his followers. And anyway, I like Bhaktisiddhanta's translation. Here's the BBT purport. It may be argued that an intelligent person can actually perform pious activities within the material world and thus never experience suffering, since unhappiness is caused by sinful or impious activities. However, we often observe great suffering, even among pious, intelligent persons, because they sometimes fail in the execution of their duty and sometimes consciously or unconsciously perform a forbidden activity. With this argument, the Lord refutes the theory that simply on the strength of material piety one may remain perpetually happy without Krishna consciousness. Paragraph. On the other hand, we observe that even the most foolish or sinful persons sometimes experience happiness because even those completely dedicated to sin sometimes accidentally perform pious activities by inadvertently traveling through a holy place or helping a saintly person. The material creation of God is so complex and bewildering that even those dedicated to piety sometimes commit sins, and even those dedicated to sinful life sometimes perform pious actions. Therefore, within the material world, we do not find absolute happiness or unhappiness. Rather, every conditioned soul is hovering in confusion without perfect knowledge. Piety and sin are relative material ideas that bestow relative happiness and unhappiness. Absolute happiness is experienced on the spiritual platform in full Krishna consciousness or love of God. Thus, material life is always ambiguous and relative, whereas Krishna consciousness is the actual platform of perfect happiness. Bhaktisiddhanta's purport. The living entities who are averse to Krishna are always under the control of the three modes of material nature. Because of this, whether they are in knowledge or in ignorance, they do not become lastingly happy. And his gloss of Vishwanath's commentary. It can be argued that a person could continuously perform pious activities, avoiding all sinful acts, and thus never suffer because misery is caused by acting sinfully. The answer is that you will never find anyone in this world who is always happy or who is always distressed. Sometimes it is seen that pious men are in a miserable condition and sinful men are happy. The conclusion is that even pious men sometimes perform forbidden acts and that even sinful men sometimes perform unknowing pious activities, such as traveling to a holy place or serving a saintly person. And Vishwanath's commentary, Quote, "He who performs sin cannot be called learned. It is proper that he suffer, but he who does not perform karmas should learn to perform them." Karmas means prescribed duty, that kind of. "Then he will never suffer," unquote. Do not say this. Among all jivas with bodies, one cannot see anyone who is always happy or always suffering. Even the wise person does not have complete happiness. Even the fool does not have complete suffering. To say that we can always be happy by performing karmas, meaning prescribed duties, properly is useless pride in the karmis. And the last here is Jiva Goswami's Krama Sandarbha. You all know what is Krama Sandarbha? Anyone not know what is Krama Sandarbha? Would like an explanation. Okay. One of Jiva Goswami's commentaries on the Srimad Bhagavatam is a verse by verse. Something, not every single verse, but many verses. There are some exceptions, like Prabhupada didn't create a purport, but it's like what Prabhupada did with the 12 cantos. That's Krama Sandarbha. Krama means step. Krama Sandarbha. So when you hear Krama Sandarbha, Jiva Goswami, his verse by verse commentary. Okay. Here's his translation of the verse. The learned person is not always happy, and the fool is not always suffering. Only persons with false pride will claim that one can always be happy by performing karmas. And his commentary is short. The wise person is not always happy. This is because of performing faulty karmas from carelessness. The fool is not always suffering. This is because some punya is generated from relationship to a tirtha, etc. Okay, that was text 18. And here we go. Text 18. It is observed within the material world that sometimes even an intelligent person is not happy. Similarly, sometimes even a great fool is happy. The concept of becoming happy through expertly performing material activities is simply a useless exhibition of false egotism. I can't see what is that. The next graphic is really far out. I'll let you study it for a moment. It's modern art. But in different compartments, there's all kinds of things there, material life. Looks like somebody's eyeglasses, and looking through the eyeglasses, seeing what they're seeing, and so forth. It's like very complicated. Anyway, here's, it's illustrating the following. The material creation of God is so complex and bewildering that even those dedicated to piety sometimes commit sins, and even those dedicated to sinful life sometimes perform pious actions. Therefore, within the material world, we do not find absolute happiness or unhappiness. Rather, every conditioned soul is hovering in confusion without perfect knowledge. Piety and sin are relative material ideas that bestow relative happiness and unhappiness. Absolute happiness is experienced on the spiritual platform in full Krishna consciousness or love of God. Thus, material life is always ambiguous and relative, whereas Krishna consciousness is the actual platform of perfect happiness. I mean, I'm just amazed. Look at this. Where does she find this artwork? How much searching? Anybody that's done this kind of thing knows, like, anyway. And if you look at it sideways, over on the right there's two eyes and then a nose and some teeth, a mouth, a chin, and a belly. Anyway, it's interesting. Okay, here we go. We're going to text 19. Krishna continues, even if people know how to achieve happiness and avoid unhappiness, they still do not know the process by which death will not be able to exert its power over them. Bhaktisiddhanta's translation, even if someone was able to somehow achieve only happiness and completely avoid distress in this life, he would still have to succumb to all-devouring death. BBT purport, if the so-called intelligent materialists know the means of achieving happiness and destroying unhappiness, then they should deliver people from inevitable death. The scientists are busy working to solve this problem, but since they have completely failed, it is understood that they are not actually intelligent and that they do not know the means of achieving happiness and eliminating misery. It is most foolish to think that one can be happy with an axe hanging over one's neck. Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Mrityu sarvaharashchaham, 1034, Bhagavad Gita. I myself come before you as death and take everything away. We should not blindly ignore the disaster of material life, but should instead accept the Lord's causeless mercy, which he so magnanimously offers in his incarnation as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We should surrender to the lotus feet of Lord Chaitanya, who offers the real means for achieving unqualified happiness. The chanting of the holy names of the Lord. This is the Lord's desire. And it is in our self-interest to take up this process. Bhaktisiddhanta's purport, very short. Although learned people, under the influence of the illusory energy of the Lord, may display expertise in the field of achieving happiness and avoiding distress, they are still unable to save themselves from the hands of imminent death. And his very short summary of Vishwanath's commentary, even if one is very learned, he is certainly ignorant of how to stop death. And Vishwanath's commentary is equally short. Even if one has knowledge, one cannot be successful. They do not know the proper process by which death cannot exert its control. And here's another very interesting graphic. There's death on the left-hand side, and some other depiction of life and people, and they can't escape death. Even if people know how to achieve happiness and avoid unhappiness, they still do not know the process by which death will not be able to exert its power over them. There's the graphic again. Death with an axe or a club or something. Okay, and then one more for text 19. What happened? There we go. It is most foolish to think that one can be happy with an axe hanging over one's neck. Okay. Now we're going on to text 20. Death is not at all pleasing, Krishna's confirming. And since everyone is exactly like a condemned man being led to the place of execution, what possible happiness can people derive from material objects or the gratification they provide? I mean, there's a detachment message for you. Bhaktisiddhanta's translation: death is certainly very horrible, since everyone in this world is just like a prisoner condemned to be executed. What actual happiness can be derived from the objects of this world and the gratification that they offer? And the BBT purport: it is customary throughout the world that a condemned man is offered a sumptuous last meal. For the condemned man, however, such a feast is a chilling reminder of his imminent death, and therefore he cannot enjoy it. Similarly, no sane human being can be satisfied in material life because death is standing near and may strike at any moment. If one is sitting in one's living room with a deadly snake at one's side, knowing that at any moment the poisonous fangs might pierce the flesh, how can one sit peacefully and watch television or read a book? Similarly, unless one is more or less crazy, one cannot be enthusiastic or even peaceful in material life. Knowledge of the inevitability of death should encourage one to become determined in spiritual life. Bhaktisiddhanta's summary of Vishwanath's commentary: can the temporary happiness which is available in this world protect one who knows that he is always under the control of inevitable death? Palatable food offered to a condemned person is not relished by him because of the chilling thought of imminent death. And here's Bhaktisiddhanta's rendering of Vishwanath's commentary. If you say that there is happiness before death, the answer is that a man who is condemned to die cannot enjoy the sumptuous meal placed before him. A person who is going to be executed cannot feel happiness, even if you give him nice sweet rice and milk cakes, because such things are simply a reminder that he will soon die. Therefore, this belief that wealth and sense gratification can give one happiness in this world of birth and death is herein refuted. And Vishwanath's commentary, quote, well, at least before death one can have happiness, unquote. That is not so. Objects or the desire arising from them cannot make one happy, because death being present nearby does not give happiness. When the criminal to be executed is brought to the execution place and is offered as much sweet rice as he can eat, that offering will not bring happiness. Thus, material objects and desires for them are not the goal of life. And last is a reference in Brihat Bhagavatamrita to this verse. And it's part 1, so that means it's Narada Muni going to different places, who is the greatest recipient of the mercy of the Lord. And he's in heaven, Indraloka. We residents of heaven are tainted with faults like rivalry and jealousy. For such acts as killing brahmanas, we get entangled in the reactions of sin, and we live in constant fear of losing our posts. So what happiness do we truly enjoy? Commentary. The southern king had said that the demigods are, quote, always worshipable by men. The southern king. You know, Narada had gone to a king that's somewhere in the south, and because he was very opulent and did nice worship, and said, you know, this isn't the greatest is the heaven, so he goes to heaven. So the southern king, that's that reference. said, they're receiving mercy in heaven. The southern king had said that the demigods are always worshipable by men. He had cited several reasons for this, but here Indra answers. He refutes the statement that the demigods are, quote, fixed in goodness, by reminding Narada that they are quarrelsome. He defeats the statement that they are, quote, sinless, by recalling how he killed Vritra, Vishvarup, and others. And he dismisses that their bodies, quote, their bodies are effulgent, by pointing out that the opposite is true, because the demigods constantly anticipate some fall from their positions. As Lord Krishna commented to his friend Uddhava, this morning's verse, quote, death is not at all pleasing. And since everyone is exactly like a condemned man being led to the place of execution, what possible happiness can people derive from material objects or the gratification they provide? Last sentence, therefore, according to Indra, the demigods are undeserving of worship because they are hardly better than ordinary men. Okay. Text 20, this is our last image. Knowledge of the inevitability of death should encourage one to become determined in spiritual life. This is a comment, a contemporary comment is probably all of us have shared with others who have experienced the grief of someone dear to them, especially this COVID time being taken. And there's different experiences before, during, and after. But something that's very common is the understanding I better take advantage of the opportunity to become Krishna conscious while I have it, because it could be taken from me at any moment. So it's like not a scare tactic, it's just reality. Now, what happens is after that passes, it's back to complacency again. Like, it's how to maintain enthusiasm besides, fear of death. Yeah, so a step above that fear is, and above complacency is, you can say knowledge, or you can say intelligence that understands the nature of that which is temporary and that which is eternal. Because that's this whole section, is knowledge and detachment. So what's holding us, the back down again, is the attachment part. And there's attachment. And with that attachment comes complacency and so many other things. It's hard to make steady progress if it's just based upon, not wanting to suffer, because it's perpetual. Anyway, that's what we're hearing from Krishna. It is, and he's arguing against and defeating Jaimini philosophy, karma mimamsa philosophy, atheistic philosophy. And so if atheistic philosophy is not rested in God, what's it rested upon? It's rested upon fruitive activities. Or that, in modern times, it's not perform prescribed duties, that kind of karma, prescribed duties under the guidance of brahmanas and scripture and so forth, and doing sacrifices. And that's Jaimini's teaching. And the modern time is, several notches down from that. It's not religious, or let's say, supposing it's something that's religious, or what people say these days is, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. You know that one. It's because they don't want to be part of an organized religion, because so to be part of an organized religion, you're uncomfortable. And you see shortcomings and so many other things, so I'm spiritual. And then it's like, it's so undefined what spiritual is, so totally subjective. Absolutely subjective. And it's back to the Jaimini people, knowledge is whatever it is. People accept what's spiritual as, at best, mode of goodness. Organic meat. Mindful hamburger. For real, here in Chicago. There's a place downtown Chicago, home of the mindful burger. So, totally subjective. Here's, just to illustrate the same thing, a little anecdotal, but so many years ago, I don't know, more than 20 years ago, I was visiting a close friend who was disciple of Sri Dayananda Maharaj. His name was, he's now deceased, but his name was Prasannatma. Prasannatma. And Prasannatma, his father was a double PhD professor, religion and philosophy PhD at Oxford, Mississippi, University of Mississippi. So, I like college preaching, so we went to Oxford, Mississippi. And when I was in Oxford, Mississippi, I met another person who was a professor, an Indian man, South Indian man, Sridharan, K.P. Sridharan. And they invited me to their home for a little home gathering, and I met their son, because he'd been away at prep school. And he graduated from high school when he was, I think, 15 or 16. And he was the valedictorian of his graduating class in the whole of the state of Mississippi. He was really smart, Arun Sridharan. And he's now a astrophysicist graduate from Stanford University. Brilliant young man. So they introduced me to their son because he was, I hadn't met him before because he was away at school, boarding school. So when they introduced, his son said, I've been asking Mom and Dad a question. He said, wait till Swami comes because he'll be able to answer your question. And so I was on the hot seat. And the question was, my friends at school ask, why do you believe in God? They said to me, it would be more honest to say you don't know. And if you say, well, it helps me become religious, why not just be an agnostic moralist? Say, I don't know, but it's good to be moral. So I'm moral because it's good to be moral. Wouldn't that be a more honest position? So I didn't know how to answer them. Because, he had religious upbringing. So he had faith, but he didn't know the answer to the why questions. So I said, supposing you take the position of the agnostic. Supposing you take the position of the agnostic. You say, I don't really know. But you want to be good. So what's good? What's the standard by which you determine what's good? not only subjective, but through passage of time, this is Kali Yuga, it goes down and down. This is all anecdotal, but it just illustrates the point. I said, I know somebody, it's Krishna Lila. Many of you know Krishna Lila. And during some period of time in her career, she was in charge, she was with the Board of Education for the city of New York. And her particular service assignment was, she was in charge of all the guidance counseling divisions of the entire public school system for New York City. Imagine having that seat. So one time they had a board of directors meeting, a board of education meeting, and they had fun by saying, I'm sharing this with Arun. 10 years ago, what did it take to get expelled from a classroom? And there were 3 things. If you spoke out of turn without raising your hand, you're expelled from the classroom. 2, if you talked back to the teacher, you're expelled to the classroom. And 3, if you threw a spit wad, paper, and you're expelled from a classroom. And today's standard, 10 years later, is if you carry a concealed weapon, you're expelled from the classroom. And if you threaten the life of your teacher in the classroom, you're expelled from the classroom. And if you cause physical harm to another student in the classroom, you're expelled from the classroom. So, it was laughter and, this standard of what's right and wrong and what's okay and not okay. It's anecdotal. We know that it completely changes without going further on that topic. So, what's right and wrong? Or what is to be done, not to be done? And there is a place. And so our reason, you can say, perhaps it's your reason, our reason for accepting is there is an absolute standard. Dharmam hi sakshat bhagavat pranitam. And we accept that because there is a standard, absolute standard. And it's not, agnostic moralism, because that's all over the place. Or, being spiritual. It's all over the place. And even people that accept that there's God, it's still all over the place. Because some say this and some say that. I think it was William Blake. My friend and I read the Bible day and night. I read black and he reads white. So it's also quite subjective. So it's not just God, but it's, representatives of God to explain what's in black and white, what's in the scripture, and what it means, and how to be acharya. So not just accept God, but accept acharya. And then we can know when you come to a fork in the road whether to turn left or right. So, this is not just a fork in the road. This is now Sankhya, matter and spirit, and the controller of both, and how you navigate your way, then practical activity within the realm of matter and spirit, and the controller of both. That is not deny the existence of God, the controller of both. That's what he's dealing with. Krishna is dealing with Jaimini's philosophy. So the bucket, in short, the bucket has holes in it. People that hold this idea, it's the egoistic idea to defy God that doesn't hold. It's insubstantial. It's quite transparent. But supposing somebody grew up only hearing that and not hearing the devotional teachings, most likely they'd buy into it because, it sounds pretty good. I want to be happy. And here's the path of happiness, so let's go. And something that supports it is egoism and defiance of God. Like, I just don't want to, like these kids, Arun's classmates, this was 20 years ago. Where is it today? But, why bother being an agnostic moralist? Just be an agnostic. Nothing matters. Just do it. Okay, so let's see if there's some discussion. It's a quarter after. I kind of got carried away.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. In one of these slides, I saw sometimes dedicated piety commits sins and vice versa. So, my thoughts went to, there are few persons, whether engaging in the platform of a devotional service, say whether it be a kirtanier or a web developer or someone printing some stuffs. They are doing some printers.
Preachers, okay.
Printers.
Preacher. Printers?
Yes.
Printers?
Yes.
Printing?
Yes. So, they are acting on some devotional service.
Who?
These people, like a kirtanier or a printer, okay. They are acting some sort of a devotional service in engaging something, but on other, they are getting remunerated. How to understand when you do some service and getting paid. What is the definition on that part?
What's the destination?
Definition?
Definition?
Yes. Of getting remunerated for some service performed.
A lot has to do with consciousness, not whether there's remuneration. If I'm doing something to get something, and if I'm doing something and there's some charitable gift, like brahmanas, they receive. And if they're doing something to get something, that's not so brahminical. It's more fruitive. So it depends on the consciousness behind. Prabhupada printed books. Was it fruitive?
No.
So what was the consciousness? And he had one of the explanations of the life membership program, which became very popular in India. I mean, there are different explanations, but one of a common one is when he took the World Harinam Party to India. People that saw it, some people liked it, of course, but some people started to criticize, these are beggars. So it wasn't as respected as it was so he just changed the plan to making life members. And by making life members, it was to A and B, give his books and have people not just get money, but have people use their hard-earned wealth for something that's going to bring the cause of building a temple or serving the deity or something from their hard-earned wealth, instead of the sense gratification they would use it otherwise. So it was compassion, give and relieve them of the burden of sense gratification. Here's another one. I was in Prabhupada's quarters one time in New York when it was in the evening, and he was after an evening class, and Sri Govinda, who was the temple president of Chicago at the time, had come to see Prabhupada, and there were two main reasons. One was he wanted to invite Prabhupada to come to the first Rath Yatra, and Prabhupada agreed. And the second was he had a plan for Prabhupada speaking when he came to Chicago at a big hall. And Prabhupada, surprisingly to Sri Govinda, said, "I will come if they pay." And Sri Govinda said, "What? You've always said, we don't teach Bhagavad for remuneration." And Prabhupada said, "In your country, and people don't pay, they take it cheaply." No, he didn't start with that. He started with going to public place. It's not like that was a universal. It's what he said at that time, is my point. So then Sri Govinda did a double take and said, "Sure, we'll have them charge an admission fee." Didn't say how much, but it was just a principle. So now, our book distributors, they're at liberty to give books away. But they also want people to make a donation. So that's like a delicate part of book distribution for some people. But it's not, so the consciousness of the book distributor can be material. It can be, I'll turn in this much to the temple and the other much goes in my pocket. Anyway, so my answer to your question is it depends on the consciousness behind. And the consciousness behind should be consistent with the action.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Okay.
Two questions from Kirti Prabhu. The first question is, although I know death is imminent, I'm trying to get happiness from my senses as if on autopilot. It doesn't feel like the snake next to me in the analogy you mentioned. How do I wake up to the urgency?
Hear Srimad Bhagavatam with a heart that's open. And then how do I get my heart open? How do I have a simple heart? It's different ways of asking the same question. The answer I gave, because this has been asked 3 times recently, my answer is gratitude. We're being given something so wonderful, and we don't recognize it. We just take it like a little kid taking. And so consider carefully what it is that we are being given. And with that, gratitude will open the heart. And then you'll start to understand and not just, remain in ignorance.
The second question, I like the explanation today.
Which?
I like the explanation today that piety doesn't have a solution for repeated birth and death. What stops people from embracing transcendence?
Affinity for the temporary. Attachment. I mean, this is the 4th chapter in a row of the same thing. Why? Attachment. Krishna knows. This is from Girivaradhari Prabhu, Shriya Mataji.
as you mentioned, to keep up enthusiasm, we need knowledge or intelligence. As I see in myself, there is a gap between knowledge and practically implementing what I learned. What are few ways to improve?
This is, I have decided for a while, when people ask the how-to question, I'm going to give the same answer till they get, till it's like clear. The answer is sadhu sangha. Then you can unpack sadhu sangha however you like, but all the elements that make up sadhu sangha, sadhu sangha. I mean, I was a little less blunt with Govinda Mohini's question yesterday, but it's the same answer. Same type of question, same answer. Say it differently. It's acceptance and progress. So the acceptance is what's in the message, and then progress. How do you progress? Those things that we hear, to whatever degree, we've done this since day one of our Krishna consciousness. You hear so many things, and of the so many things, something resonates. And when there's a wish to progress, then at least that much which you've understood, you apply. Now the difficulty is I apply and then I desist because of complacency and conditioning and so forth. And then you're not going to progress so much because the anchor's down. But then you pull the anchor because that's what's needed to progress, at least to a degree. Some of the things that we are in the mindfulness of being the enjoyers of instead of being the servants of Krishna, we try to transition from the enjoyers of to the servants of Krishna. But in all the aspects of our life, we don't have to stop doing stuff. We just do them for Krishna. So whatever that is. And you progress gently, gradually. But so that's when intelligence is being applied instead of the mind and senses.
This is from Uttama Bhakta Prabhu. It's a follow-up part 2 from yesterday's question. The reason I asked the harmony question was that sometimes it's not easy for internal and external reasons. External reasons being the nature of work, location, skills, etc. My understanding is that Krishna consciousness takes the priority and drives the path, and the other thing should be adjusted to one's best ability. Is that correct?
Yes. And be patient.
Second question from Uttama Bhakta Prabhu. Before coming to ISKCON, my understanding of atheism was that one who did not believe in God or supreme power. Srila Prabhupada, generally speaking, mentions that one who doesn't believe in personal God is in the category of atheist. Is my understanding correct?
Yes. Well, what's an impersonal God or a notional God? It's not God. And therefore, not just International Society for God Consciousness, but the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Go ahead.
Shravana Mangala Prabhu sent clarification on yesterday's question.
Go ahead.
Lord Brahma renders the service of creating the universe to Lord Krishna. For living entities to utilize the creation, and very few souls take to the opportunity of connecting back to creation, and rest misuse this creation. What motivates Lord Brahma to continue rendering the service despite the result of service?
Despite the result?
Despite that, the result of the service is misused.
He's a servant. He knows modes of nature, etc., etc. It's not pleasant, but he knows that he's a servant. And there is a higher purpose for creation, and not too many people know that higher purpose, but the higher purpose is being provided.
Similar point about Yamaraj also punishing, but the results are not taking the soul to Krishna. There is a second question. Dhruva Maharaj has ruled the planet for 36,000 years, and the duty of king was to help the citizens engage in Krishna conscious activities. And not all of them do that. Yet, what motivates Dhruva Maharaj to continue the service?
A request to the people who send in questions. Could you please send in questions from the evening class to the evening class of the next day, not the morning of the next day, so that there's some continuity? So what motivates Dhruva is he's a servant. And he knows what being a servant means. That's what motivates him. That's it. Anything else in the room?
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. On this point, you are mentioning about your interaction with that student.
About what? Oh, student, okay.
And you also responded to Kirti Prabhu's question, having that simple heart and gratitude. That's what can take us. So I'm just thinking about this last night as we were hearing the Dhruva Maharaj stories. Kids just commented, we have grown up with these stories, we know everything. I was just thinking, they have that appreciation, but not so much of that value or gratitude.
Yes. You have to start somewhere. And, if your question is a parenting question, how do we teach values, not just behaviors? Is that your question? How do you teach gratitude, not just saying, please and thank you? How do you teach, the meaning, imbibing the meaning of the different stories besides just knowing the stories? Is that your question?
Partly that, Guru Maharaj, but I'm also thinking about the second generation disciples of Srila Prabhupada also. Is that going to stay with them, and when time comes with Krishna's mercy, they can pick up back?
Everything, the answer of where you're going at the time of death, is that your question? Depends on where your attachments are. No. Krishna can intervene. That's the exception. And the rule is, where your attachments are, that's where you go. 80%, 30%, 100%, where your attachments are determines. Yam yam vapi smaran bhavam, jajatante kalevaram. So we have the opportunity It's not an, using Prabhupada's language, the perfection of life is our opportunity. So supposing we don't achieve perfection of life, then what happens? It seems like that's your question. We'll get another opportunity in a very, favorable situation. Or if Krishna wants, he can intervene and just, so there are statements. I've had some discussion with some devotees that are kind of attached to the idea of Lord Chaitanya will intervene and, make everything nice. All you have to do is something, something, something. There are statements like that, but that, the preponderance of statements says 100%. And if there's some residual attachment, Krishna doesn't interfere. You have the opportunity to fulfill that residual attachment. To your left, to your right, to your right.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. This point about people being spiritual,
Point about religious.
people who say I'm spiritual,
Okay.
for them the things are not defined and very subjective.
Yes.
So even for us, we have our own filters, our own nature conditioning.
Yes, we do.
So the difference between, what is the difference between them and us? Because we're still it still feels like subjective for us.
Okay, that's a nice question. Nice question. The difference is, at least in principle, for the other people, there's no principle. The following principle is absent. At least in principle, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and through disciplic succession, I can make my connection with Krishna fully restored. I'm not there yet, but you can say faith and the principle acceptance. Now, there's different stages of all of that also, but it's in a different realm altogether than, in principle, no such acceptance.
I have one more question along those lines. I have a childhood friend who has been reading Srimad Bhagavatam with us. Not reading, just hearing. Through our reading groups, she joins and she just hears for last 15 months. So she seems to be stuck. She has this subjective things that she's holding on to. And she has really difficult time accepting the teachings, and especially Srila Prabhupada. She says that Srila Prabhupada is also a person who wrote this. So how to help her understand or Prabhupada's position, because she has really difficult time accepting. She said he's also a person. Then how do we know what he's writing in his commentary is not his perception?
It's a good question. It's a good question to ask. Supposing somebody doesn't ask, then it's a blind acceptance. So that's not, blind acceptance is not best. So you can appreciate, you're a smart lady. You're asking that question. That's really smart of you. You might want to refer her to, there's the audio recording, and then there's a transcription of John Lennon asking Prabhupada the same question. And he asked it like 6 times. And Prabhupada gives different answers. And he still doesn't accept. I mean, the question he asks is basically, Bhagavad Gita, I accept. So Krishna is the Supreme Personality God, but there's so many translations. How do I know yours is the best, or which one is best? It's another way of, you're a person, you got your subjective thing, and how do I know it's Krishna, not your subjective thing? That's not was his language. So Prabhupada's answer, the final one out of the multiple times it was asked, was, if you do accept that Krishna is the personality of Godhead, pause. I took it to mean, I know you don't. So I'm not saying your friend is like that. I'm saying John Lennon, Prabhupada understood, didn't. But something was in there, because they were searching, and he was one of the ones searching. So then whose translation would you want to read? Then he gave the symptoms, the characteristics. So someone who was always speaking about Krishna, working for Krishna, following Krishna's teachings, day and night, nonstop. That's Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. That person's going to know Krishna. Now, there are other symptoms by which one can see. But, so your friend can look at what according to, what does Scripture say? What's the criterion? And match it up. If she really wants to know. If she doesn't want to know, why is she reading for 15 months? But if she wants to know, and that's a block, what are the symptoms by which? Because it's 3 times in Bhagavad Gita. What are the symptoms of one who's beyond the modes of nature? Chapter 11, that's one place. How do we understand a self-realized soul? It's another place. So what are the symptoms, and does it match the person? Then here's another, and that is, become familiar with the writings of the previous acharyas, and is a transparent representation of the previous acharyas, not just something subjective. No, she may not have the time or inclination, but if she really wants to know, that's a way to know. I'm going to end with this by saying, in Gita Nagari, for a long time, before we started these Memorial Day weekend retreats, I was inspired by Burijan's effort to have a Vrindavan Institute for Higher Education. So we started doing something like that, instead of for a month, for a week. Or it was 2 weeks, and then it became a week, and then it became a weekend. But, Gita Nagari Institute for Higher Education. So we went there, and nearby the Gita Nagari farm, there's an elder of the Mormon Church. And as you probably know, it's one of the things in the Mormon Church, they have young people, 20 to 22, they dedicate 2 years to go and witness Jehovah to the people. Speak, preach. And they go in pairs, and they dress in, boys wear a white shirt and a tie, and, very clean-cut American kids. So during the time that we were there was a time, several years, that this elder would bring his, half a dozen to 10 young boys and girls to come to visit Gita Nagari. There was like interfaith kind of. So in one conversation with this group of young people, I shared, I grew up in upstate New York, and when I was young, every year we would go to the Mormon Tabernacle pageant in Palmyra, New York. They went, "Really? You've been there?" I said, "Yeah." "What was it like?" And I told them what it was like. And here's what happened. Da, 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 da. They went, "Wow." So, connect. And then, so I asked them a question. Here's a question for you. How do you know that what Joseph Smith received from God is what you're hearing today? That it hasn't gotten changed subjectively changed by people over time. How do you know? I said, "Well, we just trust the elders in Salt Lake." I said, "Okay, not to say they're untrustworthy, but here's something you can do. Over the generations, there must have been writings about the teachings that Joseph Smith received from God in Palmyra, New York. He went up a mountain and got teachings from God and came back down and told his people what the teachings say." So go through the writings of the elders over generations and see if anything has changed. Doesn't mean you distrust your elders in Salt Lake, but you do your homework, because that's something I've done. Because how do I know that the teachings I'm getting is unchanged over the generations? Go back and read what the previous people have written. So that's something your friend can do. I've done it. She doesn't say, "Well, he did it, so I'm okay." She can do it herself. But if that's a block and she really wants to know, there's ways to know. So there's symptoms and there's transparency of teachings. Now, their person, yes. So the voice is going to vary from person to person, even contemporaries, which speak generation to generation, because they have different audiences. So they're addressing the audience of the time. So the language is according to the audience. But the teaching, that's detail. The principle doesn't change. Take the time and trouble. Or she can come and interview me. Because I've taken the time, not purposely with a doubt in my mind, but, verification. It's doable if she wants to know. Spending 15 months listening, there's something there. So if you really want to know and you want to get on the other side of that hesitation, there's ways. I'm just going to share something that's kind of in that realm. I've been having some discussion with some learned devotees, I won't mention their names, about our Lord Brahma, our current Lord Brahma in this universe. What is his rasa? Because in Canto 2, chapter 9, it's very clear that Brahma mentioned in Canto 2, chapter 9, his relationship is friendship. Because Lord Vishnu stands, approaches him, extends his hand, and shakes his hand. That's friend and friend. That's the rasa. However, in Brahma Samhita, it says that Lord Govinda, he came to understand that he had a maid-servant relationship. And specifically, his maid-servant relationship was just beginning as the details are not explained or revealed to Brahma until later. But at least he knew his rasas, Madhurya rasa, a maidservant of Krishna. So which of those Brahmas is ours? The friendship or Madhurya, maidservant? So some research, and three of our current acharya, or most recent acharyas, Rupa Goswami, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, and Jiva Goswami, indicate something, a third, dasya. When I get done, I'll, send it around. But, one of the persons I was interacting with said, "What? I've never heard that before." I mean, even that there's two. But I said, "Look, here's this and here's that." I said, "Oh." And now it's not just two, it's three. So it doesn't say, that says that Brahma can have different rasas, that's easy. Our current Brahma, which of the three? Because at our current acharyas, or most recent acharyas, because Brahma Samhita is way back, and Bhagavatam, of course, it's our current universe, seemingly, but it's friendship. But Rupa Goswami, Jiva Goswami, and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur say in their commentaries, dasya. So it points to dasya, because they're our current acharyas. But, how do we know stuff? How do you know what's beyond your senses to know? And how do you know who's giving you the real deal? So we have faith. I have faith in Rupa Goswami and the followers of Rupa Goswami. And if Rupa Goswami says, that's good enough for me, and Jiva Goswami and Vishwanath say the same thing, slam dunk. I'm not scratching my head saying, well, maybe it's just subjective. You have to have faith. She has some faith, otherwise she wouldn't be sitting for 15 months. So now how to, acceptance and progress. How to go forward. So you have unflinching faith. Do some homework. And, consider, evaluate the characteristics. How do you know it's just, here's some crystal. How do you know it's sugar? You taste it. If it's salty, it's not sugar. If it's arsenic, you're dead. Or the proof of the pudding is in the tasting. That's George Harrison. So you can understand that's what Prabhupada said to John Lennon. So what are the characteristics? And if it matches the characteristics of a transparent person, your doubt, the cloud is removed. The uncertainty. No, there may be like, well, that's strong, but I'm not there yet. Okay. Keep examining. Keep reading the readings of the previous acharyas. Understand not just notionally, but, in principle, and apply it, and then you'll get a clearer understanding just from that application. You connect to electricity, you get a shock. Okay, it's time to end. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.